In the chronicles of gangster law and hip-hop legend, some gun thugs, drug barons, and crime bosses have stood the test of time, and their mythologies have towered above their contemporaries. We have written about many of these modern-day outlaw heroes and have recognized the part they played in the folklore that has developed around them in the streets and prisons, much like Robin Hood, Billy the Kid, Jesse James, Bonnie and Clyde, Lucky Luciano, John Gotti, and Pablo Escobar. They are icons in their own right and have the press clippings and notoriety their status has earned. Ride shotgun with SSNCO TV and see what all of the hype is about. Wayne Silk Perry, Washington, D.C., hitman for the Martinez organization. Wayne Perry has been called the Michael Jordan of the murder game, a professional head hitter and stone cold killer. The Washington Post called him one of the district's most heinous murderers. Wayne Perry is the most infamous gangster to ever walk the streets of Washington, D.C., aka Drama City. In the Chocolate City, things were going down by any means necessary, and Silk took this attitude to new extremes with broad daylight killings. He would literally walk right up and blow someone's head off. Murder, robbery, drug dealing, and extortion were said to be his business, and he took them all dead serious. The downfall. Silk is the man who protected self-proclaimed Harlem drug lord Alberto Alpo Martinez. Working as a bodyguard and hitman for Alpo, Perry met his downfall. Alpo repaid Silk's loyalty by snitching him out to the tune of multiple life sentences. He has gone down in infamy as one of the top soldiers from the murder capital. It was said that when Wayne Perry was in the streets, certain hustlers wouldn't even drive nice cars because they didn't want Wayne to think they were getting money and take their shit. He put fear into the hearts of people in D.C. like no other during his run. After being buried in the BOP Supermax prison in ADX Florence for almost 20 years, Wayne is now in the Washington State system, serving out his life sentence. Peter Pistol Pete Rolock, Bronx, New York, gang leader, sex money murder. Pistol Pete acquired a reputation as a ruthless killer who made millions in the drug game in the late 80s and early 90s. He was well known for busting his gun with no conscience, a modern day Billy the Kid. He was featured in Don Diva and As Is magazines, in several street DVDs, and in Street Legends Volume 1, Death Before Dishonor. Pistol Pete and the blood-affiliated sex money murder gang will wreak havoc on the Soundview section of the Bronx back in the day. He was well known as one of the most feared and powerful men in New York during the crack era and could get people killed on his word alone. He turned his neighborhood red in more ways than one and continued to exert his influence even after his incarceration. The downfall. During his incarceration at Rikers Island in 1996, he turned blood and brought sex money murder into the fold. OG Mac and Deadeye McKenzie recruited Pistol Pete. He continued to run his drug empire from his jail cell using letters and a phone, but cooperators would put his name in the mix, and he was indicted in North Carolina and eventually in New York City for several murders. At 20 years old, Pistol Pete went down and the charges kept coming. A bunch of his comrades in arms turned on him, and he is now serving multiple life sentences at ADX Florence, the BPOS Supermax with limited communication. It was said that he was about to get out of the Supermax, but the feds reconsidered when America's most evil gangsters did a recent segment on Pistol Pete, and they recognized the influence he still holds. Pistol P remains a reverend figure in New York and by the blood factions all over the East Coast. Boy George Rivera, South Bronx, New York, drug lord. Barely out of his teens, he built himself a reputation as one of the wealthiest drug lords to come out of New York and the youngest to be charged with the Kingpin statue. The press called him the Puerto Rican James Bond due to his fleet of cars and all of the gadgets he accessorized them with. His story has been profiled in Dawn Diva magazine, Street Legends, and Random Family. His Bronx, New York heroin operation grossed $250,000 a week. Boy George was a master of the Bronx universe. He carved out an empire and flooded the streets of Manhattan and the South Bronx with high quality heroin with the brand name Obsession. He flaunted a lifestyle as lavish as a New York socialite, like those portrayed on the lifestyles of the rich and famous. Flamboyant and charismatic, the Puerto Rican drug kingpin was one of a kind. His cars were straight out of a James Bond flick, and his illicit wealth attracted the wrong kind of attention from law enforcement, which led to his downfall to the tune of a life sentence in the feds. Howard Pappy Mason, Queens, New York, enforcer, gang leader, Fat Cat Crew. In one of the most violent eras in New York City history, Pappy Mason rose above his peers to cement his reputation as one of the most feared men in the five boroughs. He was an enforcer for the premier drug dealer of the day, Lorenzo Fat Cat Nichols, and leader of his own gang, the Bebos. Pappy was known as a crazy guy the crazy guys were scared of. Pappy Mason was a die-hard drug game soldier. When the crack vow spawned violence and bloodshed in the mid-80s, he was the baddest man on the block, and his name has been lionized in a verse by Jay-Z, Nas, and 50 Cent. His story has been covered in numerous DVDs and books like Cop Shot. He is currently doing life at ADX Florence. Kenneth Supreme McGriff, Queens, New York, crack lord and gang leader, the Supreme Team. Supreme is a towering street legend, immortalizing both hip-hop and hood law, an infamous drug lord with ties to both major players in the rap industry and a notoriously profitable and ruthless drug crew. To both law enforcement and a generation of rappers and hustlers, Supreme is a black John Gotti. The Supreme Team ruled the same streets that later produced platinum-selling artists like Run DMC, Nas, Ja Rule, and 50 Cent. Supreme was one of the most notorious street figures out of Southside Queens, and his name has transcended New York due to his countless name drops of his crew, the Supreme Team, in hip-hop and popular culture. After serving a 10-year bid in the late 80s and early 90s, Supreme got out, went legit, and made a film, Crime Partners, with the backing of Irv Gotti and his Murder Inc. record label. But the feds couldn't let Supreme live. They investigated him and Murder Inc. for years, eventually convicting Supreme on a bogus murder for hire case. His downfall was that he was a larger-than-life figure who couldn't outlive his past. Now serving a life sentence in the BOP at USP Lee, Supreme remains a legend in hip-hop and the streets. Don Diva, Feds, and As Is Magazine all have told his story as numerous DVDs and BET American Gangster series. Kenneth Booby Williams, Miami, Florida, street boss gangster of the Booby Boys. Booby and his crew built the $80 million drug empire that smuggled over 5 tons of cocaine from Panama and the Bahamas. He was the namesake of the gang and the alleged mastermind behind the Carol City organization that left a trail of bodies on the Miami streets. Miami police linked as many as 35 murders and 100 shootings to the Booby Boys as they unleashed what the papers called an 8-year barrage of murder and mayhem on the city in the 90s. A decade of death, the newspaper called it, as the savage drug gang killed to establish their turf and retaliate against rivals with AK-47 blasts. Warring with other drug fashions in the Miami-Dade area, the Booby Boys left death in their wake as AK-47 sprayed rapid fire, cutting down all in their path by turning their neighborhoods into virtual narco zones and killing fields. Booby and all his comrades are now serving life in the BOP, mostly UPS Coleman in Florida. They have been mentioned in countless rap songs, interviewed in magazines like Don Diva, and had documentaries like M.I.A.O. put out by the rapper Rick Ross glorifying their exploits in the drug game. They are true street legends from the crack era in Miami, modern day Tony Montana's, original gangsters. Lorenzo, Fat Cat Nichols, Queens, New York, drug lord, hustler, the Fat Cat crew. As the south side of Jamaica, Queens became ground zero for hip-hop hustlers, the mythology and legend of Fat Cat has grown and taken on an Al Capone type level. Fat Cat was the star of the dope show in the 80s. He had more money, more bling, more cars, and more power than all his contemporary. He was the first and most successful of the crack era gangsters. Numerous rappers like 50 Cent and Nas have dropped his name in verses. The south side of Jamaica, Queens, and more specifically the block on 150th Street was where Fat Cat held reign. The area brought in millions annually due to the drug trade, and Fat Cat pocketing most of these ill-gotten gains. In a time dominated by Italian mafia, Fat Cat got his and set up the stage for rappers and the hip-hop scene with his attitude, mentality, and style. The downfall: Fat Cat was too big and too known. He made too much money and had too big a profile. He got busted and continued to run his empire from prison. He had his parole officer whacked for violating him and killed at will, trying to take out all of the witnesses against him. He was eventually tied to the murder of the New York police officer with Pappy Mason that shocked the nation and ushered in the current war on drugs. Fat Cat is serving a life sentence in the New York State prison system for multiple 25 to life charges despite cooperating with the feds in the Pappy Mason murder case. Fat Cat and his supporters dispute this, but he was in the BOP WICSEC program for over 20 years before being shipped to the state to finish out his time. Number 8. Freeway Ricky Ross, Los Angeles, California. Godfather of crack, Freeway Boy. Freeway Rick got so rich, so fast, that he used to tell people that God put him on earth to sell cocaine. He's been called the Walmart of crack and was the biggest black drug dealer of recent history. He was a trailblazer in the crack trade and reaped millions as an unknowing pawn of the CIA, who used the millions he generated to fund the CIA-sponsored Contra War. Several rappers have taken Ross' name as his stage moniker to capitalize off his notoriety. At the birth of the crack epidemic in LA, Freeway Rick found himself at the helm of a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. By the mid-80s, Ross was LA's godfather of crack. Jumping into the role of drug lord with a passion, he used his sharp mind to organize a criminal organization that franchised crack outlets across the nation like McDonald's. The downfall: he was arrested by the Freeway Ricky Ross Task Force and sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. After winning his release due to police corruption, Ross sought his redemption, but fell victim to the drug game and got a life sentence. After almost 2 decades in prison, Ross got his case overturned and is now back in the real world, using his expertise to change lives and make his fortune. A controversial figure, Freeway Ricky has single-handedly been blamed for the crack epidemic. He moved tons of cocaine, made millions of dollars, and supplied the Crips and the Bloods with enough product to saturate and infect every inner city neighborhood across the nation with crack. With drive-bys, Rick has turned his life around and is now doing all he can do to overturn his legacy as a drug dealer. His story has been told in numerous magazines, books, and DVDs. 9. Rayful Edmond, Washington, D.C. Kingpin, Rayful Edmond Crew. At his peak, Rayful sold 2,000 kilos a week, reaped gross profits of $70 million a month, and ran the operation with over 150 soldiers to support him. In the high-profile and glamorous life he led, champagne flowed like water. Trips to Vegas, New York, and Los Angeles were commonplace, and $50,000 shopping sprees at Trump Plaza were routine. 60 Minutes called him the $300 million man. To his hometown of Washington, D.C., during his 1980s reign as the city's biggest cocaine dealer, Rayful Edmond was public enemy number 1. At the height of the Dodge City brutal crack epidemic, Rayford distributed 60% of the cocaine that flooded the city's streets. Historians have blamed the crack storm that engulfed D.C. on Rayford, the downfall. Rayford was the president and CEO of what authorities called the largest network for cocaine street sales in Washington, D.C. As a teenager, he did business with Colombian cartels and ironically destroyed the same northeast neighborhood that he grew up in, but at the same time helping residents by paying rents and buying clothes and food for them. He was a contradiction in terms, a Robin Hood for the hood. Edmond has emerged as one of the most recognized people of the last 50 years in Washington, D.C. His story has been told and retold in numerous books, magazines, and DVDs. Rayford was a DC gangster legend until he was tarnished by his reputation by snitching after getting busted again moving more cocaine into the city from his prison cell. He was serving a life sentence in the BOP's Wickset program but was released this year. Number 10. Richard White Boy Rick Walsh, Detroit, Michigan, Kid Kingpin, best friend's associate. Very rarely does a teenager attract the attention that White Boy Rick garnered during his heyday in the streets. He became a local pop culture touchstone as he rocketed to stardom in the vicious and brutal underworld of Detroit in the mid-1980s. Not only was he a teenager, but he was white, and these unlikely circumstances led him to the top of the black underworld at the age of 17. White Boy Rick came to dominate Detroit streets in the rough and rugged crack era, a time marked by massive bloodshed and death as a result of the cocaine trade. By the age of 17, White Boy Rick was one of the most powerful kingpins in Detroit, associating with the colorful cast of drug and gun thugs that held sway in the city like Maserati Rick, the Chambers Brothers, Best Friends, and D. Holloway. At the age of 15, White Boy Rick was meeting with Detroit police and federal agents and getting paid for information. Yanked out of high school, he was groomed as a high-profile drug dealer and transformed into the notorious White Boy Rick. When the feds no longer needed him, they cut him loose and busted him for drug trafficking. He got in the game as an informant, turned into a legend, and now he's serving life because of his notoriety in a Michigan State prison. His story has been profiled in numerous books, magazines, and DVDs. With all of the conflicting mythology, White Boy Rick remains a controversial and intriguing figure to this day. He has been connected to rap stars Eminem and Kid Rock, who are attracted to his infamous iconic status. It's said that during his trial in 1988, he was rocking Armani suits and had groups of teenagers packing the courtroom and chanting his name. He has gone down as an infamous street legend of epic proportion.
SS and Co TV.
SS and Co TV, the channel for your eyes and your ears.